right, I am now joined by the great Glenn Greenwald. Um, I've been reading your stuff for a very very long time. There's a point I think in during the Obama era, when I wasn't very politically active, but I think my main political activity was reading Glenn Greenwald articles in Salon and using them as cheat sheets for arguing with my liberal friends at the bar about drones and civil liberties. So very good to see you.
Yeah, it's very nice of you to say. It makes me feel a little bit old, but I'll take it.
Fair enough. Since then, you post Salon. You were at the Guardian, and after the Guardian, you had you helped to found the Intercept, a publication that you just left. So can you tell us a little bit about why you started the Intercept in the first place, and then what happened such that you ended up leaving?
Sure. So I think a lot of it has to do with how I started my career in writing versus the way more traditional journalists did. And I think this was what explained a lot of the confusion on the part of other journalists as well about what happened. I didn't go to Columbia Journalism School. I didn't get a job at the New York Times in some entry-level position. I never wanted to do any of that. I just kind of started a blog in 2005, largely because there were things I wanted to say that I felt like weren't being said. At the time, I was a lawyer, and I was really interested in executive power theories and abuse of civil liberties on the part of the Bush administration in the war on terror. And so when I started my blog, the way it would work is, it was a free platform, and I would just kind of open a post and write what I wanted to say, and didn't care who I was pleasing or angering. I just wrote exactly what I felt. And that's why it became so gratifying to me, and also why it began to grow. And so this model of being able to write freely without editorial intervention, without people censoring you, was fundamental to how I began writing. And so when I went to Salon, when I went to The Guardian, when they offered me jobs, the condition for my going was that I would continue to have the same right, not just to publish without an editor, but to post publicly to the internet without even an editor being needed to do that. And they revamped their system to let me to do it. So in 2013, in the middle of the Sunday reporting, when I started The Intercept, I did it in part to guarantee to other journalists that same kind of editorial freedom and journalistic independence that I had enjoyed all those years, because I believed, and still do, that preserving the right of journalists to speak freely in their own voice, not to be homogenized or flattened by editors, is something that's necessary to make journalism vibrant again and interesting and honest. And so, that was part of what The Intercept's concept and vision was, and also to always be adversarial to intelligence agencies and government agencies and those who wield power. And so obviously, I feel like it's gotten off track some in those broader senses in terms of those bigger values. But as I made clear when I left, I wanted to publish an article. They tried to not just edit it, but prevent me from publishing it without major alterations that I didn't agree with. And so having my freedom of expression constrained or curtailed that way was just entirely unacceptable. I obviously didn't create my own media outlet to impose upon myself restrictions that I never had previously had.
Oh, you hold on. You're muted, Glenn.
Yeah, I just did that because I have a dog who's barking. So I'm gonna.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. Actually, it's making me a little bit nostalgic, because one of the last times, I don't know, one of the times last year, I was a guest on the Michael Brooks show in studio. I would do a weekly call-in segment, but like only every once in a while, I'd go in studio. And one of the last few times I did that, he interviewed you at the beginning, and I remember sitting there on the couch and hearing all the dogs in the background. But yeah, so this is an important point, right, for anybody who's kind of following this, because very quickly after you announced that you're leaving The Intercept, this sort of party line response that formed like right away was, look at Glenn Greenwald whining about censorship when really, he's just talking about editing. All journalists get edited. What are you talking about, right? And I think that it's important to make maybe a couple distinctions here. I mean, one, I do think on the larger issue, when you think about issues about free speech, and not just free speech in the narrow sense, but like why we value free speech, the free flow of information, the free exchange of ideas. Sometimes I'm a little disturbed when I see leftists and progressives starting to sound like right-wing libertarians on this topic. Like, it doesn't. So, what some newspaper does, what Twitter does, none of these have anything to do with free speech. Free speech is only about what governments do. And then the other issue is that context matters, right? Because I think that some of this was cynical, but some people probably saw some of those emails exchanged. They thought, okay, well, I've been asked to alter articles, as much as this. What's the big deal? And I think that what I'm hearing you saying, and it's maybe worth like circling and underlining a couple of times, is that if it might not have been a big deal if this was something that was just the well-established relationship that you had with the editorial team at the Intercept, that they made judgment calls about the content of articles, that they decided whether they thought that something was a worthwhile story or not. They decided whether or not they thought your interpretation of the story was fair. And in this case, maybe you disagree with some of the calls, but no big deal. But it wasn't, right? You said you specifically started this publication to not have that relationship, and for many years, right, for several years, this was basically respected. I mean, you were not, you weren't subject to this kind of editorial oversight.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, first of all, I think there's a lot of jealousy and resentment, petty, bitter resentments in journalism, like there is in a lot of professions, but I think it's particularly acute in journalism. I've noticed it many times before. So, of course, there are a lot of journalists who have shitty jobs and work under terrible conditions, and that's really true. And I have empathy for them. And so when they see my ability to have the leverage to negotiate this special arrangement, which I have negotiated and I realize is rare for the field, they kind of feel angry about it. Like, why should he get to publish without being edited when he wants to? And I'm constantly having to negotiate with my editor over what I can and can't say. And that may be true. Like, there may be a lot of journalists who only work well with editors or who need to be edited all the time. But as you pointed out, this has never happened to me in 15 years of writing before, not at Salon, not at The Guardian, and never at The Intercept until now. And I feel like it's worked out pretty well for me. I've been doing this for 15 years. I've never had a story retracted. I've never even had a major correction. I've broken a lot of big stories. I've had a lot of impact with my journalism. I have a big audience that has always grown inexorably. So apparently people like the writing, even when it's not being edited, or maybe because of that. And, I think that, for me, if it were the case that I was always being edited, and then suddenly I started complaining that being edited is censorship, I would understand this grievance, but that has never been how I've worked. As you point out, the only exceptions are if I'm doing some very original, complex reporting, like in the Snowden reporting, in the Brazil exposés we did last year, I did work with editors. It was my call under my contract. That's the arrangement, is if I think there's either legal liability possible for the outlet, I have to ask for a legal review. If I think that it's beneficial for my journalism, I ask for to work with editors, which I've done in the past. But an article like this would never have generated editorial scrutiny had it not been for the fact that it was going to be extremely controversial because it was coming shortly before an election that all the editors at The Intercept were highly invested in terms of the outcome. And it wasn't like anybody thought, this is, I think, the other confusing part is, it wasn't like anyone really thought that my article was going to sway the outcome of the election, right? Like, in order to do that, you have to really produce something extraordinary. And my article really was just kind of a recap. It was like my own analysis of the reporting that had been done as opposed to original reporting. So nobody thought, including me, obviously, that it was going to make the difference in the election. What they were really petrified of was that in 2016, we were one of the outlets, along with the New York Times and a few others, that did a lot of reporting, meaning we did our jobs, about the highly relevant emails that were published by WikiLeaks that showed high-level corruption of the DNC, cheating by the DNC, and the primary between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, and that showed other aspects of Hillary Clinton's behavior, like her speeches to Goldman Sachs, that she was trying to conceal. And because of that reporting, starting basically from election night in 2016, when Trump won, for the next 4 years, all we heard, both internally but externally, is, oh, you behaved poorly, you're responsible for Trump's victory because you did this reporting on Hillary's emails. And they were petrified that had I published this article, they would spend another 4 years hearing from their friends and their colleagues and people at the New York Times and on Twitter, oh, look, you did it again. Either if Trump won, you helped Trump win again, or you tried to help Trump win by publishing this article about Biden. And if you're a journalist who's petrified of what people are saying about you because you've done reporting, you should go pick another field of work. So that's one thing, it kind of like, disgusted me. And had they simply honored the standard way that we worked, which was by letting me publish these kinds of articles without editorial scrutiny, no one would have really bothered with it. It wouldn't have really been a problem. But the reality is, the Intercept has become this outlet over the years, the last few years, that is kind of the kind of outlet that I created the Intercept to counteract and to undermine and subvert. It frequently quotes intelligence officials anonymously with no evidence, including a week before my article that I wanted to publish. The Intercept published a bullshit article claiming that former CIA officials like John Brennan and James Clapper and Michael Hayden claimed that the Hunter Biden laptop materials were Russian disinformation, which turned out to be totally false, but the Intercept published it. So had the Intercept been this publication that had very rigorous, lofty editorial standards they were simply applying to me because that's what they believed in, I could have even swallowed it more. But the reality is, if you want to publish something at the Intercept that aggrandizes liberal preconceptions or flatters left liberal ideological goals, you can publish anything you want. There's no editorial standards applied. It was very specific, very unique, and very deliberate because of what I was writing when I was writing it. And that's why it was censorship. Not because I think being edited is inherently censorious, but because the motives with which it was being done and the way in which it was being done was all about the perspective I was voicing and not about anything concerning editorial standards.
Yeah, so that's worth like just kind of nailing in before we move on to broader topics, because if what we're talking about a lot of times when we talk about censorship is not, of course, government censorship is one thing, but very often that's not what we're talking about. If you have, look, even if you have like a private university that doesn't allow, students to bring in certain speakers, there's no issue of government censorship or the First Amendment there, but I think people would naturally refer to that as censorship. So what we mean by censorship in a lot of context is obstacles to the free flow of information or ideas that we consider to be illegitimate. And what's illegitimate depends to a certain extent on context. I think that, look, I write for Jacobin. It's a publication that exists to promote a certain political point of view. If there's editorial, direction that has to do with that, with the political point of view being promoted, that that doesn't strike me as illegitimate because it's part of the nature of it. And similarly, you have publications like the National Review on the right or whatever that exist to support that. There are other kinds of publications that are supposed to be more neutral referees, and there's the Intercept, which, as you say, you founded specifically to let journalists pursue the stories they want to pursue and to give their commentary in a relatively unfiltered way. And I think you heard you say that this is even like spelled out in your contract, your employment contract there, that they wouldn't do this. And they did this for the first time in 15 years, specifically because of this story about Hunter Biden, which, even if nobody there is foolish enough to believe that there are swing voters in Wisconsin who are hanging on every word that's published in the Intercept to see what they think about this story, to decide whether to vote for Biden or Trump, there's this obvious pressure not to be seen as trying to help Trump win, and it's something that's also obviously a story that in general the media class was very concerned about. That the Twitter famously went as far as to stop people at one point from even DMing each other the link to the story, which is really extreme and disturbing for reaction. And so in context, it seems like there are some pretty clear political motives. Certainly the motives can't be editorial. That doesn't make sense on its face, considering both the prior arrangements being upended and also the fact that if people read the email, right, which they can on your Substack, then the objections that were being made weren't objections on matters of fact. They were objections about interpretation of the facts, and that seems like precisely the sort of thing that under this contract, under the arrangement that had been honored before, and under the mission statement of the organization, that seems like the sort of thing that they particularly were not supposed to interfere with. So, and I guess before we completely move on from this, just one issue that I think is worth highlighting is that what you think about the election should be a slightly separate issue from what you think about like the role of journalists or what sorts of stories should be pursued by journalists, or at least I certainly think so, right? That like I'm somebody who did argue for leftists in swing states at least holding their noses and voting for Biden for various reasons having to do with the National Labor Relations Board and other things. But I'd like to think that we can make that. I mean, I don't know if you agree with that or not, right? But I'd like to think that whatever somebody makes of that issue, that they can make their case. That one, they can make their case honestly, right? That they don't have to actually try to hide information about the pros and cons of giving candidates in order to make a case about how people should vote. Worst case, like you could act like French socialists and communists who voted for Macron to stop Marie Le Pen from coming in, but would even talk about doing things like wearing rubber gloves to the polls. But two, even if you do think that, this is bad, you should make some kind of pragmatic trade-off here, you should try to minimize this information that makes the Biden family look corrupt, because the election, even if you think that political strategists should make that calculation, surely that isn't, or at least shouldn't be, the role of journalists.
Yeah, there's several interesting points in what you just raised. And so let me start with the question of censorship and free speech, which is a extremely important topic to me, always has been, not just as in my work as a journalist, but even before that as a lawyer. Obviously, the Constitution, when it guarantees free speech, is only guaranteeing the right to be free of state or official censorship. But we clearly have a broader meaning when we talk about free speech. It's been not just a legal concept, but one of values. It stems from the Enlightenment, when the idea was that no institution, whether the Catholic Church or the monarch, ought to have this place where it resides beyond ever being challenged or questioned. So free speech wasn't originally conceived of as a constitutional dogma or legal doctrine, but as a societal value. And one of the things that I did find so odd, because that day when Twitter was barring you from even posting a link to an article by the New York Post, the oldest newspaper in the country, the fourth largest one. Yes, it's a tabloid owned by Murdoch with right-wing politics, but it's actually a real newspaper with reporters and stories broken. It's not some fake news site that was created 3 months ago on Facebook. It was stunning. And when then Facebook dispatched the former Democratic Party operative to announce that it too would algorithmically suppress the story, it was a kind of big-footed censorship by these Silicon Valley overlords who reside outside of democratic accountability, let alone constitutional constraints. And I found it so bizarre, as you've alluded to, that leftists started sounding like Cato Institute scholars or Koch brother libertarians when they were saying, this is a private institution, they have the right to do whatever they want. This isn't about, okay, first of all, let's imagine that tomorrow, Google, Facebook, and Twitter, all private corporations not regulated by the Constitution, hold a joint press conference and say the following: anybody who criticizes Donald Trump and the Republican Party shall be banned instantly, and Google will not list any articles or websites containing criticism of the Republican Party. only criticisms of Democrats and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris shall be allowed. Would anybody have any doubt understanding why free speech values have been implicated, even if the Constitution itself hasn't been violated because those are private actors? I sincerely doubt it. Because, as you point out, free speech means the free flow of information, not just the state's interference with it. There's another ideological aspect to that, though, which is the question of monopoly power, which has always been extremely important in left politics, going back more than a century. 2 months ago, just 2 months, the Democratic-controlled House Committee on Antitrust, I forget the full name, antitrust, trust, monopolies, whatever, issued a huge report that concluded that 4 tech companies, including Google, Amazon, and Facebook, particularly Facebook, are monopolies. They have monopoly power and therefore ought to be regulated by the state, either broken up or treated as a trust, the way water and electricity companies are treated as utilities as part of the public trust. So that was the other bizarre thing of leftists saying, oh, leave Facebook and Twitter alone, they can do whatever they want, aside from the fact that they wouldn't accept that or think that way if it were the reverse. Imagine if the New York Times link to, links to the New York Times reporting on Trump's tax returns had been blocked, people would flip out. But it's also the case that these companies are not just any other private companies. They have massive power in the marketplace of ideas. And therefore, what they do is our concern in terms of free speech. And I just want to touch on the question of journalism and its role, because I think it's a really interesting one that you raised. I mean, I get that there are people who are very vested in the outcome of the election who believe that Trump is this unique fascist threat and that we have to do everything and anything possible to defeat him, and therefore I shouldn't be, or nobody should be, reporting negatively on Biden in the days up to the election. And I get that opinion. The person who has influenced me most intellectually in the world and someone who I regard as one of my closest friends, Noam Chomsky, has spent 9 months saying that. And I've had disagreements with him publicly and privately, but I completely respect that view. And I think one of the things that the left needs to learn how to do better is have these kind of disagreements without treating them like they're heresy or blasphemy or things that people deserve to be expelled from good left-wing discourse the minute they diverge from whatever consensus there is. But the issue of the role of journalism that you raised is a really important one, and it's one I thought a lot about. So let me leave you with this on this question. So in 2018, Jair Bolsonaro, who I regard as a actual fascist with, unlike Trump, with the capacity to implement that vision, somebody attacked my family many times, including before he was inaugurated, and then of course tried to imprison me at the beginning of this year. In 2018, on the campaign trail, he was stabbed by this kind of lone actor who was psychologically disturbed, and he came very close to dying. Had he got to the emergency room 3 minutes later, he would have bled out from the wound. So imagine you're the ER doctor who's on duty when Bolsonaro is brought in, and you believe very strongly that Bolsonaro is a fascist who will try and end Brazilian democracy, will harm a lot of people, maybe kill them if he survives and then win. So you have 2 choices. You could either intervene medically to try and save Bolsonaro's life by acting as an ER doctor, or you can decide that his life is not worthwhile to save, that the world would be better off if he were to die, and you could purposely let him pass away. I don't think anyone wants doctors arrogating unto themselves that calculus, because that's not the role of a doctor. In order to have a healthy society, you need to have doctors have the view, my role is simple, it's to save all lives, period, not to decide who lives and who should die. That's a decision way beyond my ken. And if doctors started doing that, even if they did it in a way that you liked, like letting Bolsonaro die, that would be really menacing for the society. That's how I see journalism. If I want to work for Joe Biden, I should go work for the DNC or the Biden campaign or an activist group or whatever. But if I want to do journalism, I'm undertaking the obligation, like the doctor undertakes the obligation to save all lives, to publish all information that I think the public has the right to know about powerful political actors, including Joe Biden, including Democrats, even if it's before the election, and then let other people say, his campaign, his lawyers, his surrogates, whatever, oh, this evidence is not relevant compared to the Trump corruption scandals, it's insignificant, whatever they want to say. But to ask journalists to corrupt their own role to pervert journalism and convert it into shilling or being spokespeople for a political party or a presidential campaign, if you're on the one hand claiming that you're worried about democracy and democratic values that Trump is threatening, but on the other advocating that model of journalism, there's a huge antagonism there, because journalists who start manipulating public opinion instead of informing the public are themselves threatening democracy in really fundamental ways. And it's just something I don't believe in.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I should say, by the way, to clarify, I don't actually quite agree with the Chomsky position. I don't think Trump's a fascist. I just, I think that the differences between, a right-wing Republican who do things like appoint union busters to the National Labor Relations Board and a mediocre, shitty centrist Democrat who at least wouldn't do that, right? Are things that do make a difference to me.